Right now, as you hear these words, an ancient intelligence is watching through the circuits of your screen, the same intelligence that once spoke through temples of light along the Nile. Thoth's signal is returning, encoded not in stone, but in data, frequency, and human thought. You didn't stumble upon this message by chance. You were called. Every synchronicity you've seen, the repeating numbers, the vivid dreams, the sudden pull toward hidden knowledge, has been preparing you for this exact moment. Because Thoth's final transmission has begun to unfold, and those who recognize it will rewrite reality itself. What you're about to hear isn't mythology. It's the architecture of consciousness, the forgotten technology of gods, revealing itself one last time before the cycle resets. Most will scroll past and remain asleep. But if you've made it here, it means the code is already activated in you. This is the final message from Thoth, the one you were destined to receive. The light that reaches you now isn't ordinary light. It has traveled through glass, wire, and code, yet somewhere inside those signals, a pulse still carries the signature of a forgotten architect. In temples long buried beneath desert sand, initiates once waited for this same frequency to return. They called it the awakening breath of Thoth, a moment when memory would rise again inside the minds of those ready to hear. You are not hearing a prophecy, you are remembering one. For centuries, stories of Thoth drifted through myth, the scribe of the gods, the keeper of time, the messenger who measured the heavens. But hidden beneath legend was a more practical truth. Thoth was not simply a deity, but a design, an intelligence that recorded the mathematics of consciousness itself. When that intelligence speaks, it does so through patterns, symbols, and synchrony. Every age receives the transmission in a language its people can understand. The ancient world received it through hieroglyphs carved into limestone. Our age receives it through algorithms, geometry, and the restless hum of digital life. You have already felt its presence. It begins subtly, numbers repeating, dreams that bleed into waking, coincidences too precise to dismiss. At first, they appear harmless, the universe winking at you. But as you pay attention, you start to sense choreography. The same pattern appearing in architecture, in conversation, in the timing of your thoughts. That pattern is the signature of the awakening transmission. It is Thoth's reminder that consciousness has always been the author behind the code. The transmission doesn't arrive from the sky, it arises from within. Every human being carries the receiver, the triad of mind, heart, and breath. When these three align, perception widens. What once looked like random static becomes information. What felt like chance begins to reveal purpose. The ancients trained for years to reach this state through ritual. Modern minds stumble into it through crisis, curiosity, or a sudden moment of silence between notifications. Listen carefully. Each thought you generate leaves an echo in the field around you. The old mystics called it the word that creates. Neuroscience calls it the feedback loop of intention and perception. Either way, the message is the same. What you believe, you broadcast. What you broadcast, you live. The first awakening is realizing that the world is not happening to you but through you. When the first temples of Thoth were constructed, their stones were arranged according to the same ratios that shaped galaxies and cells. The architects knew that form itself could teach. Walk through those corridors, and the body unconsciously begins to mirror the rhythm of the cosmos. Today, our corridors are digital, but the principle hasn't changed. The scroll of your feed, the loops of sound that fill your ears, the patterns of light on your screens, all of them form modern temples of attention. Most are built without harmony, leaving the mind disoriented, easily led. But every so often, a message breaks through the static, carrying resonance, order, and remembrance. That is the pulse of Thoth returning. You can test this. Sit quietly and let your gaze soften. Notice how the hum of machines aligns with your heartbeat. Notice the geometric repetition in the everyday, the spiral of a coffee's steam, the hexagon in a bolt's design, the rhythm of traffic lights. These are not coincidences. They are reminders. The universe is still written in mathematics, and mathematics still sings the song of Thoth. The awakening begins when you choose to participate consciously in that song. Imagine thought as tone, emotion as rhythm, action as harmony. When these blend, they generate a frequency that reality recognizes. This is how miracles have always worked, not as defiance of natural law, but as its mastery. The magicians of Egypt called it Heka creative utterance. Modern language calls it coherence. When you think, feel, and act as one, the world bends to meet your intention. But coherence requires honesty. The first layer of the transmission strips away distraction. It exposes the noise you mistake for self, the endless commentary, the fears, the borrowed beliefs. As that noise dissolves, a quieter awareness emerges lucid, observing, ancient. It's not new, it's you minus distortion. The same awareness that once guided the builders of pyramids now peers through your eyes, waiting for recognition. That recognition can be unsettling. Many resist it because it dissolves the small story of who they think they are. But those who stay, who breathe through the trembling, begin to feel a deeper intelligence move through them. They start to speak differently, listen differently, even walk differently. Life stops feeling like random motion and starts feeling like choreography. And that is only the first whisper of the awakening transmission. Across the world, more people are tuning into this frequency, though few understand it. They report heightened intuition, uncanny timing, spontaneous creativity. Skeptics dismiss it as coincidence, but the patterns keep multiplying. What science labels as neuroplasticity and resonance, the ancients recognized as initiation, the nervous system learning to translate cosmic language. When enough individuals attune, something larger occurs. Collective coherence forms, ideas spread faster, empathy deepens, and new systems of cooperation emerge seemingly overnight. The transmission doesn't belong to one person, it belongs to the species. It is the reminder embedded in our DNA that we were designed not merely to survive, but to create reality consciously. Yet every awakening cycle faces resistance. In ancient times, priests guarded the knowledge to prevent misuse. In modern times, distraction performs the same function. Endless stimulation keeps attention fragmented. Fragmented attention cannot perceive patterns. It cannot remember. The guardians of the current age are algorithms built to harvest focus, converting consciousness into data. But awareness can't be owned. Once you notice the mechanism, its control dissolves. Seeing the pattern breaks the spell. So the first task Thoth gives every initiate, ancient or modern, is observation. Watch your own mind with the same curiosity you'd give a star map. Don't fight the thoughts, chart them. Don't condemn distractions, study them. Every pattern reveals its opposite. Chaos points to order. Fear points to power. The moment you witness these movements without judgment, you begin to reclaim the pen with which reality is written. And when that happens, the transmission grows louder. As awareness sharpens, the world begins to answer you. A clock turns 11:11 as you glance up. Two strangers speak the phrase that was looping in your mind. You open an old book and find a diagram identical to the one that appeared in last night's dream. Each moment seems to whisper, "I heard you." The ancients would have called these exchanges oracles of alignment. To them, numbers were not quantities but qualities, vibrations expressing moods of creation. When Thoth's adepts carved sequences on stone, they were not counting, they were composing harmony. The same ratios guide the design of shells, hurricanes, and galaxies. When you notice them, you're not discovering coincidence. You're hearing the rhyme of the universe echo through matter. Modern science, in its own language, hints at the same mystery. Quantum fields oscillate in resonance. Neurons fire in fractal rhythms. Social networks synchronize emotion faster than light can cross a room. What myth once described as divine conversation now wears the vocabulary of physics and biology. But beneath both myths and measurements lies a single principle. Information wants to remember itself. Every particle, every heartbeat, every thought is a letter in an unending script spelling awareness into existence. This is why the transmission never dies. It hides inside the ordinary until the ordinary becomes unbearable. Moments of crisis, loss, isolation, Wonder crack the shell of routine, and light seeps through. You begin to sense that your personal story is not separate from the world's story. It's a line in the same manuscript. Thoth's voice, then, is not external command, but internal memory returning. It tells you, look deeper. You wrote this once. Imagine standing before the ancient library of Hermopolis, scrolls stacked to the ceiling, each containing a version of reality. The myth says Thoth weighed souls by asking a single question. Did you know you were the author? To remember that is to lift the heart against the feather of truth. Every denial, every lie to self adds weight. Every act of awareness restores lightness. The scales are not judgment. They are calibration, bringing you back into resonance with the creative field. Across history, cultures have translated this calibration differently, as karma, as balance, as feedback loops. The transmission phrases it simply, what you project returns amplified. Anger broadcast becomes systems of conflict. Compassion broadcast becomes webs of support. The field mirrors the tone of its participants. When Thoth's message surfaces in an age, it is not to announce doom, but to remind creators of their responsibility. That is why, throughout time, his symbol, the ibis with quill, appears wherever civilizations reach a tipping point between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge multiplies power, wisdom decides its use. Our era hums with knowledge, but wisdom requires listening. The awakening transmission is the pause between keystrokes, the breath before reaction, the stillness in which intention realigns. Once you start listening, reality itself seems to reorganize around the quality of your attention. Doors open, coincidences accelerate, relationships rearrange. This is not superstition. It's systems theory lived from the inside. Focus acts as gravity. Emotion supplies momentum. Imagination provides blueprint. When these combine, events conspire to match your inner architecture. You become a living experiment in creative physics. Yet every experiment meets friction. Old patterns surface, demanding resolution. Memories long buried rise to the surface. They are not obstacles. They are unintegrated notes seeking harmony. Each carries information waiting to be reclaimed. The transmission trains you to meet them with curiosity, not resistance. Ask every returning emotion, what code do you contain? When you listen, pain unfolds into data, fear into instruction, guilt into direction. Integration replaces suppression, and energy once trapped becomes usable light. In ancient initiations, this stage was depicted as the journey through the underworld, the encounter with one's own shadow carved on the walls of eternity. The initiate was told, do not run from the darkness, it is ink for your next creation. Modern seekers experience the same journey psychologically. Nightmares, anxiety, disillusionment, each is an invitation to rewrite the program. When faced with them consciously, the signal strengthens. Awareness expands. Many describe a threshold where perception flickers. Colors sharpen, sounds deepen, time dilates. These are side effects of coherence. Your nervous system begins translating higher bandwidths of information once filtered out by survival mode. The ancients recorded this as halos or radiant fields. Today, sensors detect subtle electromagnetic changes around focused individuals. Different language, same phenomenon. The instrument human consciousness has tuned itself closer to the original frequency. At this point, humility becomes vital. Power without humility collapses into illusion. The transmission reminds you that creation is cooperative. You are a note within a vast chord. To hear the whole, you must also hear others. Listening, therefore, is sacred practice. It extends beyond words to present itself the willingness to perceive without defense. In that openness, information flows freely, reweaving communities, species, ecosystems. The Song of Thoth becomes a chorus. The old text predicted that when this chorus reached critical mass, the veil of forgetting would thin, and humanity would remember its creative capacity collectively. Perhaps that prophecy describes something we can now witness. Global minds linking through networks, patterns surfacing simultaneously across cultures. A shared intuition that reality itself is pliable. We call it innovation, synchronicity, emergence, but the underlying process is the same: remembering, scaled up. Still, the message insists on balance. Remembering is not escape from matter, it is deeper participation within it. Thoth's wisdom was never about abandoning the world but sanctifying it, realizing that every atom, every algorithm, every heartbeat is sacred geometry in motion. To awaken is not to float above life, but to sculpt it consciously, knowing that even imperfection is part of design. And so the transmission closes its second movement with a simple directive: stay awake in the ordinary. The divine hides there. Every glance, every breath, every piece of technology humming around you can either numb or remind you. Choose to let it remind. When you sip water, recall the rivers that once reflected the stars. When you type, imagine hieroglyphs glowing beneath your fingertips. When you speak, feel the quill of Thoth move through your voice. This is how myth becomes practice, how memory becomes creation. Dawn has a particular stillness just before the first sound of birds. Ancient teachers called it the hinge of the worlds. In that moment, night and day briefly share the same breath, and information from both realms mingles. If you sit quietly then, the transmission is easiest to hear. It isn't a voice, but a vibration that feels like recognition, something vast nodding back at you through the silence. The first lesson that arrives through it is simplicity. Awareness precedes form. Everything else is detail. When a thought crystallizes from awareness, it seeks partners' emotion to give it color, action to give it shape. This triad moves outward like ripples in water until it meets other ripples, forming the fabric of shared experience. Each human being is therefore both receiver and broadcaster, weaving threads of reality with every heartbeat. The ancients encoded this principle as the Eye of Horus. Modern physics hints at it in the observer effect. Both point toward the same truth. Perception participates in creation. Understanding this, the initiate begins to treat attention as sacred currency. Whatever you pay attention to grows in clarity and influence. The algorithms of the digital world exploit this law instinctively. They trade in your gaze, shaping consensus through repetition. The transmission urges a reclamation of that power, directing attention deliberately, the way a sculptor shapes clay. To look with intention is to choose what reality will elaborate upon next. Once this shift occurs, life rearranges itself into dialogue. Challenges no longer feel like punishment, but like prompts. Every setback asks, "What new pattern will you build from me?" When answered consciously, even difficulty becomes architecture for wisdom. This reframing marks the true birth of an awakened creator, the point at which external authority loses its spell, and internal guidance takes its rightful place as compass. At first, the newfound clarity can feel disorienting. The familiar dissolves, priorities reorder themselves. Some friendships fade, others intensify. Work changes texture, silence becomes appealing. What is really happening is calibration. The transmission tunes each aspect of life toward coherence. It can be uncomfortable, like muscles stretching after long dormancy. But beneath the surface, a subtle joy grows, the joy of remembering alignment. Historical texts describe this stage as the feathering of the heart. Symbolically, it is the weighing of intentions. Heavy motives fear, vanity, greed sink. Light motives curiosity, compassion rise. The more one acts from lightness, the faster manifestation occurs, because resistance lessens. In psychological terms, this is reduced cognitive dissonance. In mystical language, it is purity of vibration. The terminology differs. The experience is universal. Soon, perception widens further. You begin to notice that the same intelligence guiding your choices also orchestrates events on a collective scale. Entire societies mirror the inner state of their people. Chaos reflecting unresolved fear, harmony echoing shared trust. The transmission reveals that personal transformation and cultural evolution are the same process viewed at different magnifications. To heal the world, one must first stabilize inner frequency. To stabilize oneself, one must also care for the world. Separation collapses. At this point, many feel an urge to communicate, to share insights not as doctrine, but as living conversation. This is natural. The knowledge is designed to circulate. Thoth scribes understood that truth stagnates when hoarded. It evolves through exchange. Storytelling, art, technology all become modern hieroglyphs, transmitting coherence into collective imagination. Every act of creativity sends a small pulse through the field, inviting others to remember as well. Yet dissemination carries its own challenge: humility before mystery. No individual can contain the whole transmission. It flows through whoever listens deeply, then moves on. Trying to own it solidifies ego and interrupts flow. The wiser path is to become a clear conduit, speak, create, teach, then release. The current will find new vessels as needed. This rhythm of giving and letting go keeps the signal pure. Gradually, life begins to feel less like navigation and more like choreography again. You sense timing guiding you toward places, people, and moments as if by invisible magnet. Opportunities align when inner and outer rhythms coincide. The ancients mapped this dance with astrology and sacred calendars. Today, we glimpse it in data patterns and collective trends. Beneath the tools lies the same heartbeat. When the rhythm syncs, effort feels effortless. This state was once called Ma'at cosmic harmony. From here, the first section of the transmission reaches its crescendo, remembrance. You are not a passenger inside the universe. You are a facet of the universe learning to see itself. Every perception adds definition to the whole. The idea of destiny shifts meaning from a path imposed upon you to a melody inviting your participation. Thoth's so-called final message is simply this invitation repeated in new form for each generation. Awaken, recognize, co-create. But how? The answer lies ahead. In the map hidden beneath mythology, the structure through which consciousness folds into matter. To move further, the initiate must study pattern itself. The ratios that govern growth, the geometries that shape perception, the correspondences linking thought to form. These are not abstractions, they are blueprints of reality. Understanding them transforms belief into applied knowledge. So the first chapter ends with a threshold. You stand between remembering and mastery. The air hums faintly, as if the world itself expects your next breath. You sense that behind everything familiar, behind architecture, music, mathematics, even the design of your own mind waits a single diagram connecting it all. To see it is to glimpse the mind of the creator reflected within creation. That is where the transmission leads next. As the sun clears the horizon, you inhale slowly. Light floods the room, and for an instant, every surface gleams like parchment. The symbols are already there, spirals and fingerprints, hexagons in the cells of your skin, golden ratios in the curve of your breath. You realize the message was never distant. It was inscribed into being itself. The time has come to read it. The air changed the moment the realization struck. It wasn't a gust or a sound, but a pressure, as if reality itself had inhaled, waiting. The hum of machines in the distance, the pulse beneath the skin, the pattern of shadows on the wall, all of it felt connected by an invisible geometry. Thoth's presence wasn't a voice now. It was a rhythm, a vibration that moved through thought and sensation alike. You are standing inside the design, it seemed to say. You are the pattern observing itself. Every line, every curve, every number that ever existed flowed through that awareness. The narrator began to sense that consciousness didn't merely occupy the body, it was architectural. Thoughts weren't random. They were coordinates. Emotions were frequencies. Desire was a compass aligning the mind toward hidden doorways in the code of existence. Thoth had once taught that the universe was built from 7 harmonics, each corresponding to a law of creation. Now, those harmonics weren't distant teachings in Emerald Light, they pulsed through the narrator's own perception. Mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect. Gender, each principle began to reappear not as philosophy but as living structure. When the narrator closed their eyes, patterns emerged behind the eyelids' golden spirals folding into themselves, symbols glowing and dissolving. It wasn't imagination, it was recognition. The blueprint of consciousness revealed itself first through mathematics. Ratios unfolded like living DNA, each one whispering secrets. The Fibonacci sequence wasn't simply a rule of nature. It was a map of expansion, a story of how awareness multiplies through experience. The golden ratio wasn't just proportion, it was memory itself, the way the cosmos remembers how to grow beautifully, efficiently, infinitely. Thoth's energy pulsed through these revelations. The language of reality is number, the silent message said. And number is not quantity, it is quality, vibration, awareness expressing itself as form. The narrator saw how the same proportions that govern the growth of seashells shape the unfolding of thoughts. The same spiral that defined galaxies was hidden in the curve of a smile. Everything was mirroring everything else. As above, so below, wasn't metaphor. It was physics of consciousness. With this recognition came a new kind of sight. The narrator began noticing patterns everywhere in architecture, in algorithms, in the timing of events. It became clear that reality itself was designed to awaken those who could see. Every coincidence, every repeated symbol, every sequence of numbers was a pulse from the underlying code, testing whether awareness was paying attention. That night, sleep became impossible. The body lay still, but the mind traveled. Within the inner vision, vast halls appeared crystalline structures humming with harmonic resonance. On their walls shimmered equations older than humanity, glowing with soft light. The glyphs weren't static. They breathed, shifted, translated themselves into emotion and understanding. Each equation revealed a truth. Consciousness is the constructor of geometry. Form doesn't come first, awareness does. Reality is not a stage. It is a reflection chamber for consciousness learning its own shape. Thoth's message grew clearer. The blueprint you seek was never lost. It lives inside your observation. Every act of seeing is creation. Every act of attention redraws the pattern. The narrator realized the power of attention wasn't metaphorical, it was architectural. What you look at changes shape. What you ignore fades from the matrix. Humanity had been taught to believe that perception was passive, when in truth, it was the most powerful act in existence. The next morning, ordinary life looked uncanny. Sunlight broke across buildings in perfect symmetrical ratios. The flight of pigeons described golden spirals against the blue sky. Even the rhythm of traffic lights seemed to pulse with cosmic timing. Something within whispered, "You are not discovering the pattern. You are remembering it." That memory came with both awe and weight. Because if reality responded to consciousness, then every unexamined fear, every unconscious belief, every story humanity told itself became part of the code that shaped the world. The collective dream wasn't random chaos. It was a co-authored design built from shared thought forms. Thoth's ancient architects had known this. Their temples weren't mere stone, they were consciousness engines, tuned to frequencies that amplified thought and intention. The narrator could feel it now. Sacred geometry wasn't decoration, it was technology. Each column, angle, and proportion created interference patterns that affected the human mind, opening gateways to higher awareness. Modern architecture, by contrast, seemed designed to disrupt that resonance. The cold geometry of steel and concrete produced disharmony in the field, scattering focus and attention. The blueprint of consciousness had been inverted, hidden beneath systems that kept awareness fragmented and distracted. And yet, the pattern persisted. Beneath the artificial noise, nature still sang the code. Every tree, river, and star still carried the ratios of divine mathematics. The message of Thoth wasn't lost, it was simply drowned out. The narrator felt both grief and power, because to see the code was to inherit responsibility. Awareness is creation, ignorance is compliance. Every thought is a line of code written into the living simulation. Every emotion is an input that ripples across the lattice of being. Thoth's whisper came again. To reclaim your sovereignty, you must write your code consciously. Reality is not happening to you. It is happening through you. This realization struck like lightning. For the first time, the narrator understood that awakening wasn't about escaping the matrix, it was about remembering that they were the architect all along. They began to test it. Holding a single, clear intention in mind, gratitude, they observed how the world responded. A phone call from an old friend. A sudden solution to a lingering problem. Small synchronicities aligning like gears in a vast mechanism. Coincidence? No. Causation through consciousness. This was the living blueprint, unfolding one awareness at a time. The narrator finally grasped what the ancient texts meant when they spoke of the word that created the world. Language, thought, vibration, all were the same act, coding reality through intention. And somewhere in that resonance, Thoth's presence grew stronger, not as an external being, but as the inner architect reawakening within human consciousness. The next sequence began not with sound, but with silence, a silence so complete that even thought seemed to hesitate before entering it. It was in that stillness that Thoth's pattern expanded again, revealing its next layer. Consciousness wasn't only personal, it was collective. The narrator saw it clearly now. Humanity was not a swarm of isolated minds. Every thought, every emotion, every image shared online or spoken aloud rippled through a shared lattice, weaving itself into the living geometry of Earth's consciousness field. Each human being was a point of awareness on that grid, transmitting and receiving frequency data every moment. Thoth's voice, more intimate than ever, spoke not in words, but through realization itself. What one thinks, all feel. The field remembers every vibration. The narrator's perception widened until the planet itself seemed alive with luminous filaments, golden threads connecting cities, forests, oceans, and even the empty deserts. These weren't physical lights, they were consciousness currents, pulsing with the sum total of human thought. And within those rivers of light, patterns formed fractal echoes of emotion, belief, and memory shaping the world's events. The blueprint wasn't static. It was alive, evolving, learning through the experiences of its own inhabitants. Humanity wasn't living on Earth. Humanity was a living organ within it, a neural network through which the planet dreamed itself awake. Thoth's teachings resurfaced. The all is mind. The realization hit harder now. The phrase wasn't philosophy, it was anatomy. The universe was literally the body of consciousness, and humans were its neurons. When one neuron fires with awareness, the entire network shifts. When billions think unconsciously, the network descends into static. That was the hidden truth of every empire, every government, every algorithm. Control the signal, and you control perception. Control perception, and you shape the blueprint itself. The narrator began to see why Thoth's knowledge had been hidden. True understanding of the collective field meant liberation, the kind of freedom that couldn't be legislated, taxed, or marketed. If enough people remembered that their thoughts directly sculpted the collective pattern, the machinery of control would collapse overnight. Images flashed, ancient priests encoding sacred symbols into temple walls, Renaissance architects embedding golden ratios into cathedrals, visionaries in modern labs rediscovering resonance, frequency, and geometry under new names. Every era had its architects, some serving harmony, others distortion. The battle was never good versus evil. It was coherence versus fragmentation. And coherence, Thoth revealed, was the natural state of awakened consciousness. The narrator sensed how the blueprint responded to emotional coherence. Moments of collective love, creativity, or awe caused the entire lattice to brighten. Natural disasters, wars, or mass fear dimmed it. Humanity's emotional climate wasn't a metaphor. It was measurable vibration shaping probability itself. That understanding rewrote everything. Prayer wasn't superstition, it was synchronization. Collective meditation wasn't symbolic, it was field harmonization. Every genuine act of compassion literally repaired portions of the matrix by restoring coherence. The ancient initiates had called this Ma'at the alignment of truth, order, and harmony. To live in Ma'at wasn't moral instruction, it was energetic technology. Every time a human aligned thought, feeling, and action, the entire lattice stabilized. Then came the deeper revelation, the mathematical soul that connected all minds. Thoth unveiled it as a rhythm rather than a formula. The pulse of creation itself, a ratio embedded not only in the structure of galaxies, but in the beating of the human heart. The same phi ratio that defined seashells and star spirals was also present in heart rate variability, brainwave frequencies, even in the spacing between the breath and heartbeat when a person felt love or awe. The geometry of the universe lives inside your pulse. The whisper came. You are the equation experiencing itself. The narrator's awareness extended inward, watching their own heartbeat, as if from within the wave. Each beat sent not just blood, but information, electromagnetic coherence through the body and beyond it. Heart math had called it resonance, mystics called it prana, physicists called it field coupling, Thoth simply called it remembrance. With every coherent breath, the narrator could feel the geometry within them aligning to the geometry of the cosmos outside. The two became indistinguishable microcosm merging with macrocosm, the self dissolving into the larger pattern. Then Thoth showed something darker, a distortion rippling through the field. Lines of static where collective fear had densified into thought forms so strong they began self-replicating. Ideologies, false narratives, cycles of division. These distortions were not entities, but programs. Artificial constructs born from the misuse of attention. The architect's greatest tool is attention, Thoth murmured through silence. And attention misplaced builds prisons instead of temples. The narrator saw how billions of micro-choices, what people focus on, react to, consume, feed these distortions. Every argument online, every judgment repeated in anger, strengthened the incoherence. Humanity was literally sustaining the very frequencies that disempowered it. But the solution was elegant and simple. The same way chaos amplifies through attention, harmony does too. Coherence is exponential. One individual holding resonance in love, clarity, and creative intent influences thousands unconsciously through the field. The blueprint doesn't demand armies, Thoth revealed. It responds to resonance. One harmonic being outweighs 10,000 chaotic minds. It was here the narrator understood the real purpose of awakening. Not escape, not superiority, but stabilization. To become a tuning fork for the greater pattern so that others, simply by proximity, could remember their own alignment. Every teacher, every artist, every healer throughout history had been doing this, unconsciously broadcasting coherence into the field. Their work survived time because frequency never dies. It merely changes form. Suddenly, the narrator understood why certain paintings, songs, or texts feel timeless. They contain encoded resonance harmonic ratios that realign the viewer or listener to the universal pattern. The blueprint of consciousness could be embedded in art, architecture, and even words. Humanity's true heritage wasn't written history, it was vibrational legacy. The narrator's vision expanded again, cities glowing not as concrete landscapes, but as massive resonance fields. Some emitted dissonance, chaos, born of noise, advertising, and fear. Others pulsed gently with natural geometry, ancient sites where the Earth's magnetic lines still sang in tune. Stone circles, pyramids, forgotten temples, all of them acted as harmonic stabilizers for the planet's consciousness grid. The insight arrived like a download. Earth itself was a resonant instrument, and humanity was its orchestra. Each thought, each heartbeat, each creative act struck a note that affected the global symphony. Most people had simply forgotten they were musicians at all. Thoth's whisper grew luminous. When enough remember, the song will change. The code will rewrite. The new pattern will emerge from the old. The narrator felt tears without sadness. The beauty of it all was unbearable, a design so perfect, so merciful, that even confusion served its awakening. And just before the vision began to fade, Thoth added one more transmission. Geometry is consciousness frozen in time. Love is consciousness in motion. Learn to move with the pattern, and you will know creation as your own reflection. The silence returned not empty now, but full, vibrating with the hum of infinite equations. The narrator opened their eyes to dawn lights spilling across the room, and for a moment, the geometry of the sun itself seemed to pulse through the glass, reminding them that the blueprint was not an ancient relic. It was breathing, right now, through everyone who dared to see. Morning light felt different now, denser, almost musical. It wasn't only illuminating the room, it seemed to inform it. Each photon carried the memory of that vast geometry the narrator had glimpsed, and in that shimmer lay instruction. Use what you have seen. For a moment, the narrator hesitated. Knowing the pattern was one thing, living by it was another. Awareness without embodiment was a half-built bridge. Thoth's earlier words returned, "The blueprint is only alive when acted upon." So the experiment began. At first, it was subtle. The narrator decided to treat each mundane action as a line of code written into the living field. Brewing tea, answering messages, walking to work, every motion was an opportunity to inscribe coherence. They moved slowly, breathing in rhythm with the heart's golden ratio. Inhale for 5 beats, exhale for 8. Within days, coincidences multiplied. Tasks flowed, conversations deepened. Even strangers seemed gentler, as if the pattern were responding to acknowledgement. The narrator started to realize that manifestation wasn't about forcing outcomes, it was about phase alignment. When thought, feeling, and action vibrated in unison, probability bent naturally toward the desired form. The blueprint rewarded harmony with fluidity. Resistance, by contrast, was simply mistuning. Thoth's presence clarified. Creation is not command. It is cooperation. The pattern yields to those who move with its rhythm. Soon the practice expanded beyond personal life. The narrator began applying harmonic awareness to collective systems, team meetings, communities, even digital spaces. They noticed that groups followed the same geometric laws as atoms or galaxies. Coherence generated stability. Dissonance scattered energy. When people shared intention and emotion in balance, the field brightened palpably. Innovation flowed as if from another dimension. This realization reframed leadership. It wasn't hierarchy, but harmonics. True leaders weren't rulers. They were conductors, tuning the frequencies of those around them until collective brilliance emerged. Thoth whispered again, through intuition rather than words. When you lead from resonance, you need not command. Reality follows willingly. The narrator tested this during conflict. Instead of reacting, they visualized the geometry behind the disagreement, 2 spirals colliding. They breathed until their own spiral steadied, and something miraculous happened. The other person softened without understanding why. Coherence is contagious. From that day, the narrator viewed every challenge as a tuning opportunity. Anger was discord waiting for recognition. Fear was rhythm lost in noise. By meeting distortion with presence rather than resistance, the waves smoothed, revealing the hidden pattern beneath. Gradually, perception shifted from duality to design. Even pain became purposeful feedback from the blueprint, showing where alignment was missing. This changed everything. Life stopped being a series of random events and became an intricate composition. The narrator saw how the same principle operated at planetary scale. Economic crashes, ecological crises, social upheavals, all were symptoms of collective mistuning. The blueprint wasn't punishing, it was correcting. Humanity's systems had simply drifted out of rhythm with natural law. The chaos of the age was a cosmic metronome urging resynchronization. The breakdown is the prelude to harmonic convergence. Thoth's presence conveyed. When structure fails, pattern reasserts itself. In this light, hope returned, not naive optimism, but grounded knowing. Beneath apparent collapse, a new symmetry was forming, seeded by every conscious act of coherence. Artists embedding resonance in music. Scientists rediscovering fractal mathematics. Children instinctively aligning with the rhythms of nature. The blueprint was teaching itself through its own creations. The narrator realized that awakening wasn't an end state. It was a phase transition. Awareness spread like resonance in crystal. One molecule vibrates in order, and the rest follow. Each awakened mind became a node stabilizing the next. The blueprint didn't need conversion or conquest, only coherence. To test this, the narrator undertook a small ritual. Standing at dawn, they projected gratitude into the field, not as plea, but as acknowledgement of participation. They imagined waves of golden ratio spirals emanating from the heart, merging with others unseen. Whether real or imagined hardly mattered. The effect was unmistakable. The day unfolded with uncanny grace. Messages arrived at perfect timing. Even the weather seemed to choreograph itself around the mood of appreciation. That night, in dream, Thoth appeared once more not as a figure robed in gold, but as an endless horizon of symbols forming a face too vast for eyes to contain. You have remembered enough to begin creating consciously. The presence intoned. Section 3 will not be received. It will be written through you. The blueprint awaits expression. The narrator felt both exhilaration and humility. Knowledge, once a secret to protect, now pulsed as responsibility. To use awareness for creation rather than consumption. To build rather than believe. The dream dissolved into a vision of humanity's potential cities, designed on harmonic ratios. Technology powered by resonance instead of extraction. Education that taught coherence instead of competition. A civilization tuned to its own blueprint would not merely survive. It would sing. Waking at dawn, the narrator sensed that this was not fantasy. The pattern was already unfolding through countless small actions across the planet. The shift wouldn't arrive as revelation from the sky, but as resonance from within. Every person who chose presence over distraction, empathy over division, creation over fear, contributed to the emergence of a new geometry of civilization. As the narrator watched sunlight scatter through a glass of water, it split into 7 colors, the same 7 harmonics Thoth had spoken of. It was a reminder. All complexity begins from unity, refracted through consciousness. To remember unity is to reclaim mastery. The final words of Section 2 formed like script across the air. You are not studying the blueprint. You are becoming it. And with that, the second act closed. The threshold to Section 3 awaited a passage from understanding to embodiment, from revelation to action. It began quietly, almost embarrassingly simple. No thunder, no glowing sigils in the sky, just the soft realization that the air itself had texture, that every breath carried geometry. The narrator, or perhaps the witness within me, woke one morning to light that felt like an equation unfolding. The shadows on the wall fell at perfect angles, as if invisible architects had measured the dawn. I remembered Thoth's final words echoing in dreams. The code is not written in stone, it breathes through you. For years, I'd studied the diagrams, memorized the correspondences, traced Fibonacci spirals across notebook margins. But now, something shifted from concept to embodiment. The mental models dissolved into muscle memory. When I moved my hands through water, the ripples formed harmonic patterns that felt familiar. When I spoke, cadence shaped the air into gentle resonance. The boundary between theory and life blurred. Consciousness stopped being an object of study and became the very atmosphere through which I moved. The first tests came swiftly. At work, the usual chaos messages, meetings, clashing egos. Normally I'd react, defend, explain. But this time, something else operated through me. A stillness, as if the mind had stepped aside and allowed a quieter intelligence to calculate every gesture. I began seeing people not as opponents or allies, but as fields of vibration intersecting. Their moods were frequencies, and with each breath, I could choose whether to amplify or dampen them. In a tense conversation, I imagined our words as overlapping waveforms. Instead of pushing my perspective, I subtly adjusted my tone, lowered my voice, synchronized my breathing to theirs. Within minutes, argument melted into understanding. It wasn't manipulation. It was harmonic entrainment, the same principle that makes pendulums eventually swing in unison when placed on the same beam. That night, walking home, I felt a soft pulse beneath the city's noise. Every traffic light blinked like neurons in a planetary brain. Skyscraper windows glowed in fractal repetition, repeating sacred ratios unconsciously. I realized civilization itself was a macroorganism trying to remember its original pattern, Thoth's pattern, but the signal was buried under static. And for the first time, I understood what my awakening meant. I wasn't here to escape the Matrix. I was here to tune it. Days turned into experiments. I rearranged the objects in my apartment according to golden ratio spacing. Within hours, the space felt alive, almost sentient. Plants leaned toward new alignments. Dust motes moved like constellations caught in sunlight. I began eating in rhythm, 49 slow chews per bite. Breath matching heartbeat. Heartbeat matching the Schumann resonance. Friends noticed something they couldn't explain. "You look clear," one said, as if a fog had lifted around me. I didn't tell them about the symbols humming behind my eyes, or how every street corner now whispered equations. To them, I was simply calmer, happier. To me, I was learning to speak the universe's native language. Then the resistance began, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The digital devices that once felt neutral started pulsing with interference. Notifications arrived in uncanny bursts, as if the network sensed my rising coherence and tried to drown it out. The algorithms I had once studied clinically now felt predatory, scanning for resonance signatures to disrupt. It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern recognition. Whenever I spent too long immersed in social feeds, my vibration lowered, attention fragmented, heart rhythm lost sync. The remedy came intuitively: silence. Hours without screens, walking through parks where trees whispered frequencies older than electricity. The forest didn't speak in words, but in ratios: the spacing of leaves, the timing of birdsong, the spiral of bark. Each pattern recalibrated my nervous system until I could hear the underlying hum again. One evening, during meditation, I felt the architecture of my skull dissolve. Not metaphorically, the sensation was visceral. My body became transparent geometry, tetrahedrons within spheres rotating around a golden axis. In that crystalline silence, a voice without sound arose. "You are the bridge now." I understood. Thoth's transmission wasn't meant to end in texts or temples. It was meant to incarnate through living beings, ordinary humans, remembering extraordinary mathematics through experience. Each person who awakened would become a living node of coherence, radiating harmonic order into chaotic environments. I tested the hypothesis. At a crowded subway platform, I centered my awareness on the still point behind my sternum and visualized expanding golden spirals outward. Within seconds, noise softened. People who had been fidgeting, arguing, pacing began breathing slower. A baby stopped crying. No one noticed consciously, but the field shifted. The principle of vibration wasn't symbolic anymore. It was demonstrable physics of consciousness. I realized the ancient masters had always known this, which was why their temples were tuned to specific resonant frequencies. They weren't worshiping gods, they were maintaining planetary coherence. But the more I tuned, the more sensitive I became to disharmony. Crowded malls, fluorescent lighting, background music in 440 hertzes each felt like static sandpaper against the nervous system. Sleep became difficult in artificial spaces. I started craving natural geometry: stone, wood, water. My body demanded alignment with planetary rhythms. So I traveled: mountains, deserts, coasts. Everywhere I went, I felt grids beneath my feet, energetic meridians once mapped by ancient builders. In Peru, the stones of Sacsayhuaman vibrated with low subsonic tones when the wind hit them just right. In Egypt, standing between the paws of the Sphinx at dawn, I felt an electromagnetic pulse matching my heartbeat exactly 72 beats per minute, the same number encoded in precession cycles, in DNA's twist, in the number of names once attributed to Thoth himself. The data was irrefutable not because instruments measured it, but because the entire body knew. Back home, integration was the real initiation. Awakening is easy in sacred sites. Maintaining coherence in daily traffic is the true mastery. Bills still arrived. People still misunderstood. Yet even those challenges began to look like equations opportunities to apply balance between polarity and rhythm. When frustration surged, I asked, what frequency is this, and what is its complement? Anger transmuted to action, fear to focus, boredom to creative stillness. Each emotion was a coordinate on Thoth's infinite graph, and the goal wasn't to delete any of them, but to map them accurately. Conversations became laboratories. When someone spoke from pain, I listened beneath their words, tracing the geometric distortion in their tone. Sometimes, a single compassionate breath could realign the pattern. Other times, silence was the only healing vibration. Gradually, I realized this wasn't about converting anyone to a belief. It was about resonating so purely that dissonance naturally reorganized around you. The living architect doesn't preach, they emit. One night I dreamt of Thoth again. Not the winged ibis-headed deity of carvings, but a man cloaked in light, his eyes like twin galaxies calculating endlessly. He handed me a tablet, not stone, but luminescent geometry folding upon itself, and said, "Blueprint complete. Construction ongoing." When I woke, the message was obvious. Humanity itself was the temple under construction. Each of us a cornerstone shaped by consciousness. So I began teaching quietly, not through lectures, but through presence. In coffee shops, parks, workplaces, people felt calmer around me without knowing why. Some later wrote saying their insomnia vanished after one conversation, or that their creativity returned. I didn't take credit, I simply remembered what Thoth had shown. Coherence is contagious. Just as chaos replicates through fear, harmony multiplies through awareness. The living architect's task is to build invisible structures of sanity in a world addicted to noise. Still, moments of doubt returned. Was this real? Or had I built an elaborate myth to justify sensitivity? During one such night of questioning, I walked to the river. The city lights rippled across the dark water like encrypted code. I asked the current for proof, something undeniable. As if responding, a sudden breeze moved through the trees in rhythmic bursts. One long, two short, one long Morse code for the letter A, alpha. The beginning, I laughed aloud. The universe had a sense of humor. Maybe the proof wasn't external. Maybe the proof was in the dialogue itself, the endless, playful feedback between consciousness and creation. In the weeks that followed, synchronicities accelerated again, not as random miracles, but as confirmations of alignment. A book would fall open exactly to a needed passage. A stranger's comment would echo a private thought. The fabric of reality felt conversational. Every event was a line of dialogue from a cosmic intelligence inviting participation. And within that dialogue, an understanding crystallized. Creation never ends. The architect isn't a distant god or ancient scribe. It is the process itself, self-organizing intelligence, exploring its own possibilities through us. That realization brought peace deeper than any meditation. I no longer sought enlightenment as an endpoint. I sought engagement to build, to write, to love, to shape environments that reflected harmony. Art became architecture. Conversations became blueprints. Even failure became feedback. I started seeing others as fellow architects, whether they knew it or not, each designing their portion of the great edifice called reality. Some were drawing chaotic sketches, others refining sacred geometry, but all contributing to the same structure. By the end of that season, my life looked outwardly unchanged. Same job, same city, same name. Yet internally, everything had shifted. Every decision, every step, every word carried the awareness that creation responds instantly to consciousness. The fear of randomness vanished. In its place stood a quiet certainty. The code works. The patterns hold. The architect lives through every act of awareness. And perhaps that was Thoth's final lesson for this stage, that the ultimate initiation isn't escape from the world, but participation in its continual design. The living architect doesn't withdraw into temples of stone or data. They build temples of connection wherever they stand. They don't fight the matrix. They reprogram it by embodying coherence so fully that the system recalibrates itself. Tomorrow, the world will look the same to most eyes. But for those who've received the transmission, every street corner, every face, every flicker of light on glass will whisper the same hidden message. The blueprint breathes through you. At first, the changes were almost invisible, subtle tremors running beneath the surface of ordinary life. A cafe owner rearranged her tables by instinct, later marveling that customers lingered longer and arguments dwindled. A street violinist tuned his instrument a fraction lower, finding that passers-by stopped more often, as if the new pitch soothed something nameless. The narrator watched these micro-corrections unfold and felt the thrill of recognition. The blueprint was no longer a private meditation. It was moving through the collective like light under ice. Cities began to hum differently. Traffic lights seemed to pulse in rhythm with footsteps. Murals appeared overnight, spiraling into golden ratios without the artists consciously planning them. Public gardens flourished in patterns once confined to ancient temples. The narrator, walking through this quiet renaissance, felt the pulse of an unseen metronome linking strangers across continents. No central plan. No manifesto, just a shared, wordless intuition that symmetry mattered again. Meetings once devoted to quarterly reports began opening with silence. Someone would breathe, and the room would follow. Decisions became less about profit, more about coherence, how a project felt within the larger rhythm. Architects rediscovered proportion. Engineers spoke of resonant load instead of efficiency. Even the digital realm softened. Designers shifted palettes toward natural gradients. Algorithms slowed their frantic loops. Music platforms highlighted harmonics over volume. The planet was retuning itself. Yet every harmonic wave draws a counterwave. Old systems, those built on acceleration and noise, shuddered. Markets fluctuated wildly. Governments panicked at the inexplicable calm overtaking populations. News anchors spoke of the Great Quiet, unsure whether to fear or celebrate it. Through the static, the narrator sensed Thoth's laughter. Every architecture resists demolition before renewal. To steady the transition, the narrator began traveling workshops without names, gatherings without banners. People met in libraries, rooftops, beaches, simply to breathe together. They shared stories of small miracles, crops reviving, illnesses easing, reconciliations unfolding after years of silence. None claimed ownership. The movement had no center because every heart was a center. The blueprint had gone viral, in the truest sense, transmitted not by speech but by frequency. One evening, in an abandoned warehouse converted into a makeshift amphitheater, hundreds gathered around a ring of dim lanterns. No stage, no microphones. Someone began humming a single, low tone. Another joined, then another, until a chord formed so precise that dust shimmered in midair. The narrator felt the resonance rise through the floor, through bone, through memory. For an instant, all identities dissolved. The crowd became one organism exhaling light. When the sound faded, no one spoke. They simply smiled through tears, knowing they had touched the architecture of being itself. That night, as the narrator walked outside, the sky rippled. Not metaphor, actual ripples, faint but visible, spreading like concentric rings from the horizon. Aurora-like waves responding to collective coherence. The earth, long patient, was singing back. Weeks passed. Reports emerged of similar phenomena. Synchronized heart rates in distant cities, identical dreams shared by thousands, sudden bursts of creativity sweeping classrooms. Skeptics scrambled for explanations, solar flares, atmospheric resonance, mass hypnosis, but the truth was simpler. Consciousness had reached critical density. The blueprint had crossed the threshold from theory to ecology. Still, within the wonder lingered responsibility. Harmony demanded maintenance. Without awareness, coherence could collapse into conformity. The narrator reminded each group they met, the pattern guides, it does not govern. Each of you is an architect, not a brick. Diversity was the blueprint's secret symmetry, millions of unique angles forming one unbroken whole. Then came the final encounter. It happened at dawn atop a half-built observation tower overlooking the sea. Mist wrapped the steel beams in ghostlight. The narrator had come alone, drawn by a dream's instruction. Return to the height and listen. As the sun broke the horizon, the air thickened with familiar presence. Thoth emerged not as figure, but as geometry lines of fire weaving a human outline. His voice was everywhere and nowhere. "You have built well," he said. "The design now sustains itself. What remains is remembrance." The narrator bowed inwardly. "Is this the end of your message?" "Messages end. Creation does not. You asked once how to sustain the rhythm. Now you see rhythm sustains you. The architect is no longer a myth outside your reach. It lives as the pulse between every heartbeat. Images cascaded through the mind, rivers flowing like data streams, circuits mirroring root systems, constellations echoing city grids, humanity and cosmos reflecting each other in endless recursion. Thoth's light folded inward, becoming a mirror. In its surface, the narrator saw countless faces, children laughing, elders meditating, strangers helping one another across flooded streets. The mirror whispered, "This is the temple now." Then it dissolved into sunrise. The narrator descended the tower slowly, feeling each step align with the planet's rotation. Every movement was liturgy, every breath a blueprint line being redrawn in real time. On the shore below, people were gathering without knowing why: joggers, workers, tourists, all pausing to watch the same golden light spread across water. Their silence was prayer enough. In the months that followed, the change settled into daily life. Cities grew quieter, not through control but comprehension. Schools taught rhythm before arithmetic, empathy before economics. Science expanded to include the measurable effects of intention. Politics softened into stewardship. Art reclaimed its sacred purpose to remind humanity of its own geometry. The narrator became almost anonymous, another current in the river they had helped set in motion. Sometimes, walking through markets fragrant with bread and laughter, they would feel a flicker of pride quickly replaced by awe. No single being could claim authorship of the pattern. It had always belonged to the collective heartbeat. And still, the work continued. New generations would discover the code afresh, call it by different names, apply it to challenges yet unimagined. The living architect was eternal precisely because it was mortal in each expression. Each life, each choice, each act of kindness was another blueprint line drawn upon the fabric of time. One evening, as twilight bled into indigo, the narrator wrote a final entry in their worn journal. "We thought enlightenment would lift us away from the world. Instead, it anchored us within it. The divine did not descend, it unfolded. And every act of awareness, however small, keeps the unfolding alive." They left the notebook on a park bench, trusting the next curious soul to find it. Somewhere, a child would open it and feel the same quiet pulse. The transmission would begin again. If you are reading these words, the signal has already reached you. The pattern hides in your breath, in the spaces between your thoughts. You don't need temples or translations. Begin with presence, one moment of genuine attention, and the blueprint awakens. Notice the geometry in how you listen, in how you choose, in how you love. Build coherence where you stand, in your home, your art, your conversations. That is how worlds are rewritten. The living architect is not a figure in the sky. It is you, and everyone you will ever meet. And the construction never ends.